Good afternoon in Washington, good evening in Europe, and deep into the late evening if you're watching from Asia. My name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have a wonderful event for you today about a topic that's both extremely important, but one that has not received perhaps enough attention. It has the terrific title name of Underwater Mayhem, referring to the dangers posed to NATO and other countries in Europe by the antics of the one rogue nuclear superpower, which happens to consider the United States to be its principal adversary, something not fully recognized in Washington. Benjamin Schmidt, who's been very active in the energy sphere and on things relating, actually more than the energy sphere, has produced a wonderful report, which he will present to you. We will then have a panel discussion with Mikhail Kurtika, who is a senior fellow here at the Global Energy Center, and also with Justina Budgenalta-Froli, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Europe Center here. And with that, I'll turn this over to Ben to present the report, and then we'll have a panel discussion. Again, thank you all for attending.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Nord Stream Book Club. Just want to get that out of the way. I'm sure everyone's written or has read all 138 pages since it was posted an hour and a half ago. So there will be a quiz at the end of this. I am an educator at the University of Pennsylvania. I teach a course called Energy, Geopolitics, and National Security, and I can assure you that my students will be reading this very carefully next semester when I teach this again. But before we start this, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Benjamin Schmidt. I'm a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Kleinman Center for Energy Policy with a joint academic appointment in the Department of Physics and Astronomy and with the Perry World House at Penn. And I really want to start by saying this whole project, which is a multi-year project that's been going on since early 2023, and frankly, even before that, would not be possible without the financial support, funding, and logistical and moral support from talented colleagues at Penn. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Molly Simon, who's in the audience, Lindsay Samahan from the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy, Professor Mark J. Devlin, and a graduate student, Sayanish Haridas, from the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and the entire team at Perry World House for supporting the satellite imagery that you see in this report. So it's a big team effort, and of course, to my co-authors. I didn't do this alone. Mikhail Kurtika, minister, will be on this panel, and also Professor Alan Riley, who is known to the Atlantic Council as a part of this. I also want to thank graduate student research assistants that helped with the repository of potential Russian sabotage operations that have taken place in the European context across the NATO alliance since 2022. That includes Annabelle Paradise, Amelia Pilot, Liam Labarge, Rachel Bina, and Axel Diamilo. And of course, I also want to thank Professor Serhiy Plokhy and Dr. Emily Chenel-Justice of the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute for launching me into this trajectory when I was back at Harvard before moving to Penn. And a special thanks to Dr. Jakob Seerup, curator of Bornholms Museum in Denmark, who played local guide, expert historian, and shipmate in this research study. And of course, also Ambassador George Kent, who was a big supporter from Tallinn, although you will be more formally recognized in Volume 2, which focuses on the Gulf of Finland. So, without further ado, I basically want to start by just giving you a little bit of an overview about the findings of this report and its scope. I'm going to basically read off some of the conclusions that they have just been announced and released. And then we will jump into the discussion with the panel. So first of all, the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, 10 years in the making. Ambassador Morningstar has been a massive supporter of European energy security, as has Landon Derrance and Olga Kahovka. And all of the sort of things that has been focused on here at the Atlantic Council, both at the Energy Center and the Eurasia Center, have been focused on all of the tenets of European energy security, which I always like to say there's 5 pillars. There's the hardware, there's diversification of energy infrastructure, sources, routes, and fuel types away from Russian overdependence, the software, the regulatory matters to push back on Russian energy monopolization, cyber and physical security of energy infrastructure, interoperability and support of NATO critical fuel supply chains, and then finally countering Russian malign influence, elite capture, strategic corruption, and looking at sanctions policy. And although we've looked at a lot of these over the years, we have looked at cyber, we haven't looked at physical security of energy infrastructure quite as much as we probably ought to have, because we thought we were beyond that in history. This is a World War II or even Napoleonic War era issue of critical infrastructure, shipping, maritime security issues, and basically harkens back to the first telegraph cables, later in the 1800s, all the way through the middle of the last century. But unfortunately, here we are again. So this project, Underwater Mayhem, Countering Threats to Energy and Critical Infrastructure Across the NATO Alliance and Beyond, is an ongoing series. This is volume 1, but the entire scope of this project is going to include the Svalbard cable cut in December 2022, the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline sabotage in September of 2022. Those 2 case studies we'll talk about today, that's in this volume. Then we will jump to the Indo-Pacific with the Matsu Island cable cut between Taiwan's main island and the Taiwanese Matsu Islands, the Baltic Connector pipeline and telecoms cables that were damaged in October of 2023, the APCOS cable that was cut not once but twice last year between the island of Cape Breton Island and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia in Canada, creeping ever closer to where we are standing today. And then on Christmas Day of this year, of course, there was the S-Link 2 interconnector that was cut in December of 2024. There was also the Sea Lion 1 and BCS cables that were cut in November of 2024 involving Germany, Finland, Lithuania, and Sweden, and of course Estonia as well in that second one, and then the Trans-Pacific Express cable and the Pinggu Island cables in Taiwan. Again, this is a global phenomenon now, and we need to treat it like a global threat to be addressed. So the research in this volume is intentionally multidisciplinary. This is not just a policy sort of analysis. It's not just a legal analysis. It's not just an economic analysis. It's not just a security analysis. And of course, that's because projects like Nord Stream 2 are not just commercial deals. So the research that is in this report and that we will talk about today includes a significant amount of field research at the sites of where these offshore attacks took place across Northern Europe, including visits to Svalbard in September of 2023, onshore locations near both of the Nord Stream blast sites on the Danish island of Bornholm in July of 2023, January 2024, and an offshore research expedition in which a fishing vessel was chartered to gather subsea sonar data out on the Baltic Sea at the Nord Stream 2 blast site southeast of Bornholm in September of 2024. The sonar data is in the report. We've also done interviews with dozens and dozens of experts, including commercial leaders with expertise in offshore energy and critical infrastructure construction and operations, commercial ship operators and related maritime industry professionals, commercial and military divers and subsea demolitions experts, current and former naval, military, Coast Guard, and law enforcement professionals. Of course, we wanted to have that firsthand experience. How did these events happen, and how was the response taken by first responders, and how can policies be changed going forward to respond to them? And then leading experts, former senior energy, national security officials, etc. Additionally, there is a significant amount of open source intelligence analysis, including Maritime Automatic Identification System, AIS, particularly from marine traffic and commercial geospatial intelligence platforms. In this case, the satellite data from Planet. Okay, so I am now going to go through briefly just the results of the 2 case studies. So first, the Svalbard cable that was cut in early January of 2022. Based on open source AIS analysis, expert interviews, site visits, and the review of investigative media reporting and related public literature, we assess as highly probable that the Svalbard subsea cable was cut by a commercial fishing trawler, the Russian Federation flagged Melkart 5. We have a moderate level of confidence in this judgment. And I just want to make a point now. Ambassador Herbst mentioned before we took the stage that it would be good to just contextualize these sort of assessments are made on a metric that is, we're trying to basically map onto a National Intelligence Council document that was released, declassified on the 10th of March of 2021, that actually talks about estimative language and how we can use levels of confidence in these sort of studies. We also talked to experts that said that the Svalbard cable cut was a military shaping operation. Remember, it was 6 weeks before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And guess what? The Ukrainians would need as much of that commercial bandwidth as possible from the Svalsat station on Svalbard to help their defense. That, of course, includes things like satellite-based communications and geospatial imagery. All right. And now on the Nord Stream side of things, again, using this same metric based on open source AIS, commercial satellite imagery analysis, expert interviews, site visits, and all the other things I mentioned, we assess as highly improbable the theory that the United States military, with help from the Norwegian military, was to blame for the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 sabotage. Furthermore, we assess as improbable that a group of Ukrainian commandos operating from a rental sailboat was behind the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. And moreover, we assess as probable that the Russian Federation itself was involved in the Nord Stream sabotage incidents. We again have a moderate level of confidence in these judgments. A wide range of open questions prevents us from going further than these, making it more probable or less improbable on any of these cases. And just to wrap up our intro before we go to the discussion, I just want to say what was based especially on this Nord Stream assessment. First, we saw that through this study that the Russian Federation has been demonstrated to regularly recruit and use non-Russian nationals, including those from Eastern European nations and Ukraine, to carry out vandalism and sabotage attacks against critical infrastructure across Europe in recent years. 2, the Russian Federation has shown via open source AIS data and commercial satellite imagery to have deployed military vessels, some with subsea warfare capabilities, at the eventual site of the Nord Stream 1 sabotage northeast of Bornholm, just days before the incident, as well as in the months earlier in June 2022, before the incident took place. Furthermore, even before that, the Russian Federation had construction vessels stationed over the exact spot southeast of Bornholm already for lengths of time in the first half of 2021 in which the Nord Stream incident would take place. In this context, we also present the findings of a October 2021 report from the Baltic satellite analysis completed for this report, also found dark vessels without their AISs on operating in the work zone in 2021 with the Russian vessels. We also have found that AIS monitoring showed that after the Nord Stream sabotage incident, at least 3 Russian flagged vessels attempted to approach the blast site investigation areas, which appear to have been intercepted and escorted away from the sites by Swedish, Danish, and US naval and Coast Guard assets. All 3 of these Russian flagged vessels, and this is where Volume 2 comes in, all 3 of these Russian flagged vessels were later observed class icebreaker Sevmerput, which was with the Nunu Polar Bear for that incident. Multiple commercial and military technical divers and subsea demolitions experts who were interviewed for this study raised significant questions regarding the assertion it would be technically feasible, though not impossible, for the rental sailboat Andromeda to have been rented and used as the platform for an operation of this scale, as has been alleged in some media sources. Well, media reports have suggested that the alleged Andromeda sabotage was directed by the former chief of the Ukrainian General Staff, Valery Zaluzhny, a capacity of Zaluzhny, a point echoed by several experts. The other thing, the marina in which this sailboat was allegedly rented from in Germany is physically located in close proximity to, guess what, a deployment facility utilized by Nord Stream 2 in 2021. We also spoke with senior, and the findings suggested Russian actors may have been behind the attacks. Investigative journalists have publicly reported on the details surrounding some of the individuals that have been reported by German media and others to be part of that Andromeda pro-Ukrainian sailboat operation, but they have showed that in at least one of the case, the alleged team members appeared to currently be freely living within the Russian Federation, supposedly after blowing up Nord Stream 2 in 2023, after the attacks took place. Experts interviewed as a part of this study have commented on past incidents of suspected Russian damage of its own infrastructure as a potential means of creating a force majeure scenario for Gazprom and other entities, and that the analysis conducted for this study suggests that the Russian Federation arguably did have the possible motivation to sabotage the Nord Stream pipelines for security purposes, to put pressure on Europe, as we speak. Finally, the Russian Federation had launched a disinformation campaign in the hours after the Nord Stream blast took place and continued to place blame on infrastructure deployments to mask the installation of intelligence or military equipment in the Baltic Sea has been a concern for decades. And last but not least, the Biden administration had demonstrated zero policy actions or statements before or after the attacks that suggest that the United States, or Norway for that matter, had anything to do with the Nord Stream sabotage. So with that, that's where facts rather than just opinionated analysis as much as possible. But again, what we're calling for is a further look into this underwater mayhem from wrapping its tentacles around the globe, which of course, ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing right now. And I wish that we don't have to write and let us work on other things. So with that, thank you so much, and let's have the discussion.
Just grab a seat. Okay. Ben, thank you. That was a terrific presentation of an important report, which hopefully will help put this issue in get higher attention. All right, let's start. Ben, for you first, how should Russian energy and critical infrastructure sabotage be looked at within the spectrum of Russian warfare, or hybrid warfare, as some people call it?
Well, I think we make this point, is quoted, I think, in 3 different locations in the report, saying that this is simply warfare. This is a part and parcel, as he says, of Russian military actions as tanks are, and everything else that you would think of in conventional military terms. I think one of the big things that we need to remember as we talk about energy security going forward, not only in Europe, but also around the world, is that these are not just economic deals, and they can have a significant impact if you're not a security-focused expert and you're thinking more about. We have shown in this report that if you do not physically protect energy infrastructure, it can undermine democratic resilience in this case of citizens not trusting their government to protect their own energy and critical infrastructure systems, as well as undermine support for the energy transition. We saw protest signs out on Bornholm near the Nord Stream blast sites, not a hotbed of protest activity, but they were saying they didn't want to have an energy island renewable project built offshore, renewable wind, because they were afraid it would be a target for the Russians. And that's a different sort of concern. We also saw kind of disinformation buttons actually put out at COP28. And again, this is security to anything else. This has to be part of the energy security and overall policy landscape.
Thank you. Justina, based on your analysis, how have Russian physical sabotage methods changed over the decades?
Thank you so much. It is a really important point to emphasize that the sabotage and energy, misuse of energy as a political tool and foreign policy tool hasn't started with Nord Stream bombings, although we still cannot really attribute to 100% who did that, but this was not a new topic. The Baltic Sea region has seen many stories before. One of them has been mentioned. Navy was approaching the construction area of this cable and trying to chase those construction ships away, so kind of hindering Lithuania's attempts to increase its energy independence. This happened, of course, just 1 year after the Crimea annexation, and really in this hot phase of Lithuania trying to free itself from the grip of Russia. But even before, for example, 2006, the Druzhba pipeline was shut. The branch that led to Lithuanian Mažeikių oil refinery was shut, claiming that it had technical issues and hasn't been repaired since then. And actually, the context was that Lithuania didn't want to sell this refinery to a Russian company and chose a Polish company instead. So there are many instances throughout history, and this is definitely not a new topic and a topic that will stay with us for a long time. So we have to remain very much wide open.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, in your view, should Nord Stream and Svalbard incidents be classified as acts of hybrid warfare, or maybe they're simply sabotage as understood traditionally, or acts of war?
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me first thank Atlantic Council and Penn University Climate, Dr. Schmidt, for his perseverance, for his intellectual and analytical tools, and for bringing this topic to the attention of widespread public, because this report is part of wider activities. And indeed, as Justyna said, we are a little bit in a comfortable situation, if I may say, being from Poland and Lithuania, because we have been confronted with this issue for years. So in a way, we do not discover that energy could be weaponized, because we were confronted with this fact for years. And if I recall a little bit my discussions with my Western colleagues, maybe I will bring the movie Don't Look Up. Yes, some of you have seen this movie. In this regard, we would have to say, don't look down, or don't look under the water. And we were confronted, we were saying, okay, there is a problem. We see that things are happening, that we see we have been blackmailed. With our allies and friends, they were somehow in this discussion, maybe it's a punctual, maybe it's only an incident, maybe you are over-exaggerating, maybe you have technical problems on your side, because that was also an accompanying information or disinformation campaign going on. So if I have to a little bit try to what the intentions, objectives, and strategies of both sides are. I mean, Westerners were unable to imagine that energy could be used as a tool, because they were living in a liberal market framework, and so
or in a dream world.
Many people and made them somehow try not to answer your question, Ambassador, or try not to a little bit get into connecting the dots. So it's better to say it's an incident rather than it's a strategy. It's better to say it's a mistake than it's a pattern. And I think that the excellent work which has been done by Dr. Schmidt, with modest contribution of many other people, brings this, there is a strategy, there is a pattern, and so this asymmetry needs to be recognized. That would be the first thing. The second thing, and let me be a little bit more personal here, Ambassador, over our energy markets, and we have been struck with the fact that gas prices were evolving in our manner in a very unusual manner. I mean, as if the supply of gas was constrained to Europe. And so we said, okay, there is an issue. Let's go to Brussels, let's discuss with our colleagues. And at that time, Kadri Simpson, an Estonian, was Commissioner for Energy, so from our zone, etc. So I brought the issue to her. We have written a letter. I mean, we did everything in an official manner, if I may say. And she said, yeah, that might be the case, but I will give it to my services to analyze. And 3 weeks later, they said, circulaire rien à voir, if I may say. Sorry for French. Nothing. There is just a market behavior of a player. Market behavior. And then nobody imagined, remember, October, November 2021, nobody, except maybe some American services, were aware of the fact that Russia is preparing the invasion on Ukraine. And so this is what we understood only after that it's the case, and it was the preparation for the invasion. So I think from the second point, from my perspective, is that we lack toolbox. We don't know how to recognize these issues, and so we don't know how to anticipate what's going on and what would be the next thing. And maybe I reserve the third point because I started a little bit too.
I'm going to follow up with a question specifically here, but for a quick answer. The question as posed might be posed differently. To be provocative, is it possible that fear at senior levels in governments across Western Europe and maybe including across the Atlantic kept them from seeing clearly what was happening? Not just in this area, but for example, when the first Russian bomb landed in Croatia shortly after the large invasion and there was no response. Or for that matter, to be even more provocative, when one or two people in Poland died as explained publicly because the Ukrainians shot down a Russian missile, also I think in 22. You don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
Okay, I keep the joker.
Okay, fine. I'll move on to the prepared questions. All right, Ben, how do you see the implications of national security professionals characterizing physical sabotage against critical infrastructure as shaping NATO alliance deterrence measures?
Well, this is a big question, and I will just say that kind of dovetails into, I think, the theme of your previous question. I won't go specific there as my
Well, I have a similar zinger for you here.
But there has been very clearly over the past 3 years a reticence by transatlantic community leaders to do anything that they believe would, quote unquote, escalate the situation vis-a-vis Russia. Anything, right? And every single drip of the weapons and the sanctions and the technology export controls and the oil price cap that was set way too high and never lowered and all of these sort of things. We can and should be doing more now, obviously, but we could have been doing more from the start, and that includes on this topic, okay? And I think that one of the things that we saw and the comparative analysis that we'll do between volumes 1 and volume 2, the critical, strategic communications around the Nord Stream blasts were not done in a way that inspired, let's say, confidence in the populace of what was going on. I think that the Finns and the Estonians learned from that and did a much better proactive and rapid response job after the Baltic Connector incident, also after the Estlink incident, and also after the Sea Lion 1. I think also the Lithuanians, of course, did that, and the Germans and the Swedes, et cetera, eventually for these other incidents. But from the start, it allowed a void for Russian propaganda to get out there and try to claim that first they claimed that the United Kingdom blew up Nord Stream, then they claimed that the United States and Norway blew up Nord Stream, and they've pointed the finger at a number of other places, except for who would have most to blame by destroying Nord Stream, or most to gain, I should say, by blowing up Nord Stream. Well, the Russians had a significant amount to gain, right? As I said in the opener, from the way in which Gazprom would be sued, and of course they are, I believe, being sued right now for billions of dollars in the non-delivery of Russian gas to Europe, because of some of the market actions, or in this case, lack of market actions that Minister Kurtika was talking about in the fall of 2021, which all of us in the expert community, I remember everyone on this panel talking about this. This is energy weaponization. And Berlin said, we don't see any sort of actual energy weaponization going on. Therefore, we're not going to abide by their agreement to sanction Nord Stream and other Russian energy entities if, quote unquote, Russia weaponizes energy. Well, of course, when that deal was made to waive sanctions in 2021, the Russians were currently weaponizing energy. And of course, this continued up and up the scale until we got to summer of 2022 with this full-scale cutoffs of basically all of the Russian conduits of gas to Europe. And nevertheless, there's the way in which you can escalate this even more if you're the Russians, and that's by possibly, again, we think probable, but not 100%, but probable, that they were behind this. Again, because of the physical evidence we saw, because of the dozens and dozens of experts, we found very few people that really thought that this was a technically feasible operation from a sailboat. I visited the sailboat itself. I didn't step on it, but I stood there right behind it, and I tried to measure. You know, I'm a wider person. I don't think I could actually have made it specifically through the hatch into the cabin without turning a little bit. So again, it shows you the scale of this. Do you have a large compression chamber? Do you have all these sort of things? Technical gas, all this sort of stuff needs to be taken into account. And the one last thing I'll say is this notion that has been kind of popping back and forth in the media that was Zelensky to blame for it? Was Zaluzhny to blame for it? Well, there's experts that have said that there was a lot of palace intrigue in Ukraine. Even though we're supporting Ukraine, there's a lot of palace intrigue. Let's make it clear, and that could be a part of this, is shown in our report. But additionally, there's claims that from a few media sources just in the past few months that said in long format interviews that Zelensky supposedly knew about this, told Zaluzhny to turn it off, and Zaluzhny said, well, you can't get in touch with these guys, these operators on this sailboat to turn it off because it's a dark op, and even, quote unquote, even a single ping from a cell tower could give up the whole operation. Yet, the German investigators that have talked to the media have also said that the reason they know where and when the sailboat sailed is that it was painting its cell phone pings all over the Western Baltic, including linking up with a passing cruise ship. So, this notion that these folks were doing this clandestine operation, were pulling into a Polish port and getting investigated and getting the sailboat searched because they were having a drunken party that neighbors had to call on the boat itself. So there's a lot of questions here. So which is it? Are they a dark op that you can't find anything about or get in touch with, or what? And again, there's a lot of loose ends here, and I think a lot of our report points these out, and there's a lot more work to be done on this.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to move on to Justina because I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So, Doctor, what do you think the selection of Nord Stream 2 and Svalbard reveal about Russia's targeting logic? What are they trying to do with those specific efforts?
Mm-hmm. So I think also, again, just to refer back to the study that I had the possibility to read a little bit, some excerpts a little bit earlier than all others. You mentioned that Svalbard was a military shaping operation just before the Ukraine invasion started. Then Nord Stream bombings could be seen as this critical point operation when the Western responses to this invasion were still in the shaping. And then Europe was experiencing a huge energy crisis just with winter nearing. So then later, just to go a little bit forward in your report, when we had now end of 2024, this cable cut of S-Link 2. So this was like 1.5 months before the Baltic countries decided or just went to desynchronize from the Russian grid and join the European power grid. So what is this saying, like this timing and this kind of infrastructure? This shows, again, this is a strategy to spread anxiety, to spread unease in the societies, to try to change our policies, to try to move us to change our policies on Ukraine, our sanctions policy, our energy diversification efforts. So this all comes into that. Plus, it's a testing ground, of course. How will NATO respond? How will the regional powers respond? Can we go further? So this huge complex, I think this is, again, a tool of a very broad toolbox of the Russian foreign, if you want, policy or maybe warfare policy that is waging against Europe and the alliance.
Just make one very quick point. On the communications front, to what you're saying in terms of shaping operations, things like this, also remember what the Kremlin itself was saying. They were saying, if only in October of 2021, or fall of 2021, if only you certified Nord Stream 2, we would be able to send more gas to Europe. They then said after the large-scale invasion began that if only you unsanction Nord Stream 2, we'll be able to send gas through there. If only you send Siemens turbines from Canada to us, we will be able to send gas through Nord Stream 2 if you unsanction it. And guess what Putin said and Peskov said after the Nord Stream explosions? If only you unsanction Nord Stream 2, one of the 4 pipelines of the Nord Stream, there's 2 Nord Stream 1, 2 Nord Stream 2 pipelines, 3 of the 4 were destroyed or ruptured. The 4th pipeline, if only you unsanction that, guess what? We'll send gas right away.
Mm-hmm.
Good point, thank you.
Yep.
I'm just going to ask one more question so we have time for audience questions. And by the way, for those listening virtually, you check into askac.org, askac.org. All right, Mr. Minister, the report mentions as a policy recommendation to combat future incidents, transatlantic countries must increase commercial monitoring technology, hardware, and data analysis tools to deter future strikes. Have there been any developments in this area?
I'm not aware, but I hope yes. So I think that the key question which is being asked by the report at the end is what we do with this, because how do we redefine the limits of action of NATO? How do we redefine where the different triggers for Article 4, Article 5, etc., are being situated? And I remember that Roman Empire, you had this limes, yes, so they defined clearly this is the place where non possumus, where we cannot agree on the invading forces, and I think it raises this question. There is a completely different space, and again, we lack tools in order to penetrate this space, to understand, to coordinate between different institutions, satellite imaging, different kind of data. Different institutions are in the Baltic Sea are not coordinating their efforts in this regard. So I think it is calling for a completely new coordination, but also more broadly for redefining what NATO is about, and especially today, where are the limits of our action.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll take the first question, the virtual one. But we have an audience here, so you'll get microphones. So please, right here the question. But I'll first have a question from virtual question. This is from Nathan Barrett. I guess this is more for you, Ben. The report mentions a lot of open source intelligence. What are your sources, and has the wider online OSINT community, intelligence community, played a role?
My sources are written all throughout the report. There are almost 200 citations, and we interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of experts, all on the record. All but 2 people in the entire study wanted to be on the record versus off the record, and this includes current officials. This includes folks that are experts in these fields, people that are leading divers in the Baltic Sea region itself, not just generally. I'll also point out, when we're talking about the actual technologies, there is a disconnect, and this is, to this point of sources. If you look at commercial satellite imagery, remember, the Earth is 70% covered in water. And these commercial satellite imagers they have the physical capability of taking an image of the Earth basically every day, things like Planet and Maxar satellite platforms. However, if you look at their online repositories, there's very, very limited offshore data. And part of that, I believe, is because there's not as much of a market for that, because you're going to basically look at empty wavetops. So the commercial critical infrastructure, telecommunications, energy, those sort of subsea infrastructure companies need to talk to the emerging commercial satellite sector, so that those areas of the sea that there is infrastructure can be continuously monitored.
Thank you. Okay, question right here, and then next over here.
My name is Anders Åslund. Excellent that you are doing this job, because this is really an important thing. My question is primarily for Ben. There have been 2 Chinese ships involved in the Baltic Sea, seemingly doing a job for the Russians. Have you looked into the Chinese connections with Russia in this regard? Thank you.
So the answer is yes, coming soon in volume 2. But I will presage some of the analysis that people believe March or April waters sailed around the world to a number of Russian ports until it did this operation. And so it's an easy, if you wanted to have a training ground for what we're seeing now in and around the Taiwan Strait. We've seen 2 cable cuts this year so far. That's a very big possibility, and I will hold off on saying a little bit more on the details of that, but there's definite connections between Russia and China in these specific incidents.
Thank you. Question here.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. So in your remarks, your remarks about Svalbard, so I happened to be up there around the time the cable was cut, and it was also around the same time the 200-mile continental shelf was being called international waters, and it was at, sorry. We got it? Okay, I apologize. Should I start again? Are we good? So in Svalbard archipelago, so around the time of the cable cut, I happened to be up there a little while after that, and it was at the time where Russia was calling 200-mile continental shelf international waters, and also claiming that Norway's regulatory structure in terms of environmental questions were designed and intended to impede Russian commercial activity, which would be approved in the context of the 1920 treaty. And so when you put all these pieces together, that's where I bumped into hybrid war. I never heard the term before. And so not one thing, and they're separate, but they're all part of a process itself, as I was led to understand. And so not isolated incidences. And when Russian boats are going from Murmansk to the Atlantic, going through the GIUK Gap, and what is going on in the deep sea, in the gap itself. So these various elements, how do you put them together? Or if I'm misinformed, forgive me. And it seems to me that it's a rather strategic approach in terms of controlling the maritime Arctic and beyond. Thank you.
Anyone want to take a shot at that?
I would maybe then, you can continue if you would like to, but I see your point for sure, that this is, as we said, a strategic approach reaching further than just physical damage, just one cable cut, and with all those dots, as you mentioned, being of strategic importance for military operations, also of NATO, of the US in this region, knowing what Arctic is about, how important, strategically important is getting. So this is definitely, it hints on a broader strategy of Russia.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, you want to? Okay. Ben, a quick question from Surya Javanti. Please, a quick answer. Has the Kremlin interfered with your research, or has it responded to your research?
Well, it hasn't responded yet, unless they've read it in the last 90 minutes or so.
They might have read it days ago.
Well, I won't comment on that. I have no idea. I hope they have. It's tells them how they should shape up. But again, I want to go back to some of the details on this and remind folks that only one thing can happen in each of these cases. And one of the biggest takeaways, and we talk about this in this report, and we'll definitely talk about it in volume 2 even more, is that it's a difficulty for law enforcement to have the same amount of rapid response and conclusions compared to the intelligence community and compared to governments, because they operate at a much higher analytical threshold or burden of proof, right? And so when we've seen things like this Swedish dismissal of the Nord Stream 2 case on legal grounds, the Danes did the same thing. That means they don't themselves in their investigation have enough to bring criminal level complaints against an individual or or an entity. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't know what happened generally. And so those are two different things, and you have to remember, and that's why I think some of the media reporting on this needs to be very clear on this, because there's situations where there's claims of certain personnel being uncertain of these ships that have cut cables, whether they're Chinese or Russian, et cetera, things like this. And when you talk to the investigators, sometimes they'll say possible, but rather because, for example, in one of these cases, the new Polar Bear, they weren't able to interdict the ship, and so they didn't actually go on. So from a criminal perspective, they can't say, our investigators got on the ship and we actually found X, Y, and Z. That's obviously changed with the Eagle S in the Gulf of Finland. Finnish special operators actually rappelled down in probably the most dramatic incident that you've ever seen on a Christmas day recently onto the deck of this ship and seized it. No one, there was no struggle, but that's a struggle. And of course, NATO's working on this. They have an awesome critical subsea infrastructure protection cell that was set up, an operational arm in Markham, and then of course they have Operation Baltic Sentry that's going on right now.
This speaks to a point that the minister mentioned. If we conducted a war based upon criminal procedure methods, we would lose every time. There needs to be an understanding that what we're seeing is a strategic danger which needs to be met at the level of strategic policy, which means not using court of law methods of proof. Okay, with that editorial comment.
Higher evidentiary threshold.
Yes.
So there's a difference,
right,
to be clear.
Right. In the government, we made decisions based on far less than the court of law proof. And if we didn't, we'd lose. Okay, we have 4 minutes and 40 seconds. We have several questions, but I have one over here. This may be the last question, we'll see. So quick question and quick answer. I mean, maybe we get one more in after that.
Thanks, Ben. Bob Sakuda, former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Energy. One of the things which we had in the USG, at least we used to, I think we still have it, at DOE, was a good group that worked on energy protection. And that focused a lot of things which we could be doing on pipelines, and maybe in terms.
Ben, Article 5, and what conditions Article 5 might be activated in case of this sabotage or this hybrid warfare? Thank you.
Okay, I'll just really quickly answer that. We have as our #1 recommendation that NATO very much should have already invoked Article 4 consultative mechanisms to make it clear to the Kremlin that we know what is going on in a lot of these cases. Again, there's dozens of cases that have been already attributed to the Russian Federation or non-Russian nationals that have been recruited by the GRU on Telegram. A lot of those are onshore infrastructure because it's pathologically easier to look at. So yes, Article 4 needs to go well before Article 5, and we haven't gotten there, and I think that's because our escalation managers have held us away from that rather than taking that necessary step. To Ambassador Sakuda's great question, yes, we've talked a lot to folks in the USG on this over the years. There are some that are quoted in this paper. We'll have even more in the next volume because there's more on the subsea cables maybe than the pipelines that we've looked at, but that's really important. And one last thing I really want to just plug, we talk about it a lot in this report. There's a tremendous 2023 documentary by all 4 of the Nordic leading public broadcasters, YLE, DR, SVT, and NRK. I'm sorry if I didn't stick the landing there. Niels Fastrup, Harvard Goodall, Inkild Eriksson, and many others that have been super helpful with this. And also, just go and watch it. It shows in real time how this sort of subsea underwater mayhem takes place and what we should be doing to respond.
Dr. Minister, do you want to jump in on either question? Okay, Peter Flory, last question. You have 30 seconds.
Does that start out? 2007, 2010, I was at NATO headquarters. We spent a lot of time arguing about how many angels on the head of a pin, cooperation, NATO, EU, information sharing, cooperation, etc. I have the impression that a lot of that has gotten better. I'm sure some of it still needs to get better yet. Curious for your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Mr. Minister.
Yeah, 2009, for example, Slovakia suffered for 2 weeks no gas supply. And then when I discussed 10 years later with my French colleagues that gas has been weaponized for years in Central Europe, they looked at me with great eyes saying, oh, really? So that's partly an answer.
No, that actually speaks directly to the point. Okay, thank you, Ben, for the great report.
One line plug, no return to business as usual with Putin on energy ever. The Putin regime specifically, there's been a lot of headlines on bringing back Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. God help us. Please, 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 policymakers, do not let that happen. Do not let the ghosts of Russia's energy weaponization come back.
We have seen, amazingly, the current administration trying to pull an Obama-type reset with Russia. Amazing. Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Great report. Thank you, Mr. Minister, Doctor, for a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for coming. And unfortunately, we have another event coming up, so we're going to have to clear the room. But if the brains of this outfit, meaning the three people on my left, are willing to stay behind outside, you can ask them questions. So, but I have to run. Thank you all. Thank you.